So here we are in day 20 of astronomy, and we're talking about chapter 18 and the census of local stars, trying to figure out why are stars blue and red? Why are they bright and dim? How far away they are? How fast are they moving? Those kinds of things, and then trying to compare them using a tool called the HR diagram. So let's get into chapter 18. One of the first things that they talk about right here is looking at the number of stars, a census here, based on how hot they are or spectral types. So these are the hottest of surface temperatures, and these are the coolest. So this would be a bluish color star, and that would be a red. And we find out that these smaller reddish color stars are more abundant, and that's just because they're easier for the universe to make such small stars because it doesn't need as much hydrogen gas. If you look at this region of the sky around Centaurus, you'll see a relatively bright star. There's also one that's very faint right over here. There's a magnification of it right there. And the thing is, this star right here is actually closer to the Earth than this one is over here. And what that means is that this star must be small and cool, and this one right here must be big and hot. So there's several reasons why a star can be bright. It can be close, it can be large in radius, and it also could be high in surface temperature. So that's why you see a difference there in the first section of chapter 18. And then they get into how do you measure mass. So we just kind of mentioned things like the size and surface temperature, but how would you get the mass, say in kilograms of a star? The only way to do that is to use a technique where you're monitoring something going around a star. In other words, when we find stars that are in companions, binary stars, that is the way really that we're able to determine how massive these two stars are using Newton's laws. So we use techniques such as spectroscopy, using red shifts and blue shifts to determine the masses of stars. And we see that the separation between these dark lines changes over time. We can measure that and model it and determine the masses of those distant stars. In a similar way, that's how we find the mass of our own sun. What we find is that if we plot make a graph here of how bright a star is versus its mass, that generally speaking, there's a trend that the more massive it is, the more luminous it is, like this. And so you might expect there to be just a random scattering, but there is this order in the universe, a mass luminosity relationship that is, somewhat linear, I suppose. Another way that we can measure the sizes of stars is using eclipsing binary stars. So sometimes stars are so far away from us that they look like one. However, sometimes it might have a small star moving in front of a big star, and so its brightness might dip tremendously like that in, say, position 2 when the brighter, smaller star goes behind. And then when the brighter star covers up the cooler surface temperature of this big star, you get a smaller dip like this. So I used to do research like this and get these light curves and be able to model the two stars and determine which one was bigger, which one was hotter, and also the combined masses of the two as well. So that's one way to measure the masses and the sizes of stars. Looking at the HR diagram, this is a human analogy right here where you have a person's height and weight. Generally speaking, the taller somebody is, the more they weigh, generally speaking. And in a similar way, what Hertzsprung and Russell did was they looked at how hot a star is. The hottest star is over here. So this is the bluish color hot stars. Here are the cooler stars here. Brighter stars up here, cooler down here. So they determined, experimentally that there was this main collection of stars here. Maybe 90% of stars in the sky fell along the main sequence. And then 5% of stars ended up being up here, a rare type of star up here. And it was cool. And the only way that it can be bright is if it was big. So they determined that these were giant reddish color stars. And then down here, they're relatively hot, but small. And so the only way that can happen is if they were tiny. And these white dwarf stars down here are about the size of the Earth, but yet white hot in appearance. And so here's some more experimental data. This is kind of has a, spectrum in the background, but this is a look at it without that background with the red giants and red supergiants, even the main sequence stars here. The red dwarfs and brown dwarfs are actually way down here, but the white dwarfs are over in this area here. It's thought that one day our sun will eventually turn into a white dwarf star. Right now it's on the main sequence right about here. It will eventually become a red giant and then a white dwarf later on in its lifetime, according to the most widely accepted models. An example of a white dwarf can be found near the brightest star in the night sky. This is Sirius. We call it Sirius A because it's the brighter of the two, but there's a smaller star right here, which turns out to be a white dwarf star orbiting Sirius A. So Sirius B is here. And by the fact that these things orbit each other over, say, 100 years or so, I think it's 30, 40 years. I can't remember exactly what the orbital period is. Maybe it's thousands of years. In that case, we use the orbital period and the semi-major axis to determine the masses of those two stars. I'll look that up and get back to you on that one. I forgot exactly how long that orbital period is. In fact, let me pause the video and I'll just get that right now. It's one of the magical things we can do with recording.